Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's Pastor Jeremiah here. Just want to welcome you to our online service this morning. Today, we have a special message planned for you because we have a team of people who are working in Kenya this week, a team of people going through World Comp Ministry that operates out of Westside Church, of course. And one of those people is Pastor Corbett, who is our technical guru, produces all the videos for our online service. And so because he's gone, we decided that we would rerun a couple of messages that we gave a few months back. And so in particular, two messages from our Stay Positive sermon series that we did several months back. And so I'm trusting that these are going to be encouraging, uplifting to you. They're two of my favorite messages, and so you get a good one this morning. And we're going to air those on May the 22nd and May 29th, so just for the next 2 weeks, and then we'll resume with our regularly scheduled messages going forward from there. So a couple of things that I want to announce before we get started with this message this morning. We have a Soup Sunday. We've been doing these on the first Sunday of every month. It's been a great way to just connect with our church community here. And the next one is planned for the first Sunday in June. I believe it's June 5th. And we look forward to having you join us for Soup Sunday. And if you'd like to contribute by making a soup, please contact Deb Sears, and she would love to connect you with that opportunity. So look forward to seeing you there if you can make it out. For the rest of you online, good to be with you this morning. We're going to take some time to worship, and then we're going to show and air this message from the Stay Positive series. So let's get into that together.
cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all. When darkness seems to hide His face, I rest on His unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. My anchor holds within the veil. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storms, He is Lord, Lord of Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, He is Lord of Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of He shall come with trumpet sound. Oh, may I then in Him be found, dressed in His righteousness alone, fall and stand before the throne. Oh,
So great to be able to worship together. And thanks once again for joining us for our online service this morning. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are in a sermon series called Stay Positive. And we launched this last week, just in light of the fact that there's so much negativity and cynicism in the world. I think it's important for us to just focus in on the importance of staying positive in life. And as I talked about last week, and I'll talk about it again this week, we tend to operate as human beings from a negativity bias. So we're 6 to 7 times, depending on the study, 6 to 7 times more likely to hold on to those negative messages that we receive, those negative experiences that we have, than the positive ones. And so we need to combat that with some positivity, being disciplined, building that discipline into our life, to not always kind of go down that negativity tunnel, right? Or get sucked down the vortex of pessimism and cynicism. We need to find a way to rise above some of that. Now, as I mentioned last week, as a disclaimer, there is a time for grieving. There is a time to acknowledge the bad things in your life, the sad things, the hard things, the disappointment, the things that we are working through. But we've got to be able to acknowledge those things and move on to a more positive disposition, a hopeful, expecting disposition. And so that's what we hope to accomplish in this message series, just learning how to do that, learning how to combat these negativity that's out there in the world and the cynicism that's out there in the world, and bring some positivity to it. And so that's the disclaimer. But we want to focus in on stay positive, and this message this week is encouragement. Encouragement. We live in a chronically negative world. There's voices of discouragement everywhere. And it really starts from the time that we're very young. If you think about your experience growing up as a kid, whether it was in school or even at home amongst your siblings maybe, but at school, you don't get picked for that team. And so you get labeled as that kid who doesn't have that talent or athletic ability, or maybe you don't make the advanced class. I know that's a big deal for kids nowadays to get into the advanced classes and to be highly accomplished students and all those kinds of things, AP courses and things like that. And then there's all sorts of other things. People make fun of how big your nose is. They make fun of your hair. They make fun of your eyebrows. There's all sorts of poking fun that goes on in school life. Maybe these days as teenagers, right, you don't have as many likes or as many followers as all the other kids in your class. And so that is another negative message that you are receiving. And kids these days, I think they really have the hard data, because of social media. They have the hard data on how unpopular they are, or how much they don't measure up to the standards of what they are looking out in the world at what everybody else seems to have. We're not as we don't achieve as much as this person or that person. We're not as beautiful or live up to those beauty standards or excellence and accomplishments and athleticism and all these other things, popularity. There's a lot of things that kids are up against. And then as you get older, it doesn't really get any easier, right? Because then you go into work and you get criticized because you didn't do well enough on that project, or your department isn't performing in the way that it set its goals to perform. Or maybe you get passed up for that promotion because you have a different personality than this other person who was promoted ahead of you, even though they hadn't been at the company as long. Then we oftentimes, let's be honest, in our relationships, especially our marriage relationships, our spouse, we could pick at our spouse. Our spouse can pick at us and criticize us. Marriages are oftentimes filled with criticisms, and we're trying to make each other better, right? But the negative messages that we receive as a result of that kind of butting of heads in the midst of that relationship can be very difficult to work through. And then you got your kids, if you've got kids, telling you that you're not as cool as the other parents that their friends have, or your in-laws are telling you that you're not raising your kids right, and this is the way we did it back then, or you get onto social media and your friends are on vacation again, and you can't even afford one vacation, and that feels negative, that feels depressing. And it's just all sorts of of those kinds of things that just kind of weigh us down. They weigh on us. I had an experience recently where somebody actually came in and gave me a compliment, right? But they said, "Hey, have you lost weight?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I have lost weight because I've been working out since January a lot more regularly than in the previous year. And so I'd lost some weight." And then that person just kind of said, "Oh," they didn't say, "Oh, wow, you look great. You look super strong." And I got the sense that they were like, "Did you lose weight because you look a little sickly? Are you sure you haven't had any complications from COVID or something else?" And I just took that message, even though it was supposed to be, I think, a compliment. I took it negatively, right? It's just so easy to take things negatively in our world. And so now this is a message on staying positive. And I know you're like, okay, well, you didn't really start in the right spirit of this message, but this is why we've chosen to do this sermon series, because there's a lot of that out there and we've got to combat that. We got to work against that. God is calling you to be an encourager, to encourage others. The world is oftentimes tearing people down. And so we need people in the world who are going to step into this role of encouragers. And at the church, we say, at Westside, we say, the world needs more people who live like Jesus. And if the world needs more people who live like Jesus, then what the world needs is more encouragers. And it's an incredibly spiritual thing to do, to build others up while the world is busy tearing them down. And so we want to be those who build people up. Why? Because we want to reflect who our God is. And our God is an encouraging God. And if there's anything you hear in this message this morning, this is what I want you to know, because this is what we come back to again and again and again. In the midst of a world in which there's so many voices of negativity, our God is an encouraging God. Our God is a God who builds us up. Our God is a God who lifts our spirits. And if we are to reflect the nature of God, then we've got to live into this discipline of being encouraging to those around us. I want you to listen to the words of the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 7, verse 5 through 6. He said, "For when we came into Macedonia," this was one of his missionary journeys, "we had no rest, but we were harassed at every turn, conflicts on the outside, fears within. But God, who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus." I loved this particular passage because it kind of spoke to me about, hey, this is the condition of the world out there, right? There's conflicts on the outside. There's fears raging within. Our lives are oftentimes just fraught with all sorts of circumstances like this. But notice that when you see something negative and it's followed with these words, "but God." I love when the scriptures insert this little phrase, "but God." It's found throughout the scriptures. In the midst of the reality of the way that the world is, conflicts on the outside, fears raging within, but God. God sent somebody who cares. God is somebody who cares. God sent someone to me, Paul says. And I hope today, if you came into this message this morning, if you logged into this online service this morning and you're facing a wall of worry, problems, financial issues, your health is deteriorating, conflict in your marriage, trouble at work, or you've just kind of thrown your hands up in the air and you're thinking, can anything else in my life go wrong? What I want you to hear today, if you are hurting and you're discouraged, is that God is a God who encourages the discouraged. God is a God who encourages the discouraged. He did it for Paul. Paul had the eyes to see that God was doing it. How did he do this for Paul? Well, he sent Titus. And it could have been a coincidence, right? That at the moment that they needed some encouragement, Titus walked into the scene. But Paul had the eyes to see, and he chose to have the eyes to see that this was something that God was doing on his behalf, to lift his spirits and the spirits of those in his group. That God was giving them what they needed to be able to endure in the good work that they were doing. And sometimes what we need is eyes to see the opportunities that arise, the situations that come along, the coincidences in life in which God is trying to impart a message of encouragement to us. And sometimes we need to see it that way just so we receive it as encouragement, just so it has that effect of lifting up our spirits. Because we think it's just a coincidence or it just was happenstance, right? It may not have the impact that it can have upon us otherwise. Last week in the live service, for those of you who haven't been able to make it live, this is why we want you to come live, because sometimes there's some great things that are shared in the live service. But my wife, Deborah, was sharing a testimony about an opportunity she had like that. She was at a store downtown, and there's a woman that came up to her and was asking her about prices and asking her about something. And Deb just kind of got into this conversation with her, and as Deb often does, just kind of implored to kind of get to know her a little bit better in this midst of this conversation, just kind of had a sense that God was doing something or working something. And this woman had an accent. She asked her where she was from. She was from Alabama. She ended up telling her story of why she was here in Seattle. She has a son who has leukemia, is at Children's Hospital. He's an inpatient. He's getting really hardcore treatment for his leukemia, his constant fevers. And it's a real difficult time that her and her husband are in right now. And to make matters worse, they have to be away from the rest of their kids for 3 months. And it had been a real difficult season for her. And Deborah just had this opportunity to encourage her, prayed for her, prayed over her son right there on the spot, and was able to be a massive encouragement to her. They connected on social media, and this woman had posted later the week about how wonderful it was to run into this woman who was a pastor's wife in Seattle, and she received so much encouragement. She was just explaining to her social media followers out there that God had always met her along this journey, this very difficult journey of having a child with cancer. And Deborah was just one of those moments in time in which God had sent somebody to encourage her at just the right time. And she had the eyes to see that it was God, that it wasn't just a circumstance or it wasn't just an accident, that it was God that was at work in Deborah, opening up that conversation, opening up that opportunity to speak encouragement into her life. And Deborah had the eyes to see that it was God connecting her with this woman, using what she had to give as a way of encouraging this woman. And Deborah was able to share that story with our community, which in and of itself was an encouragement. And it just was this awesome momentum builder of encouragement in her life and the life of that woman that she connected with. Sometimes you got to have the eyes to see it. You got to see this is God bringing encouragement to me. A song may come on the radio, maybe just the theme you needed to hear. Maybe you didn't recognize it as something from God. Maybe you just thought, oh, wow, what a coincidence, right? No, see it as coming to you from God. There's a verse that reads you like a book, or a friend sends you a message and says, hey, I'm praying for you, and you're going through a very difficult time. Don't think that that person just reached out by accident. Recognize it was divine opportunity for God to bring encouragement into your life. We are tempted to chalk things up as coincidence, but the chances are that God is speaking. Why? Because God is a God who encourages, and God is constantly encouraging you. And he often is going to use somebody else to do it. And so therefore, in order to reflect this God who encourages, we want to be those who are used by God to encourage others. So what I want to talk about this morning is the three of the most encouraging things that you can do to encourage others around you. Three of the most encouraging things that you can do to encourage others around you and encourage yourself. And the first one is this: encourage others daily. You'd be surprised at how much this encourages you personally, but encourage others daily. Why? Because we talked about all these voices of discouragement, this constant pressure upon us of negativity and cynicism. But it's not always the outside voices. It's not always the outside voices coming in. It's oftentimes our own voice. You know, we look in the mirror and say, oh, I've gained too much weight, or I can't seem to get this right, or nobody appreciates the things that I do. And we have all these kind of negativity bias, these messages going on internally. And the research really shows that we need positive messages, encouraging messages versus negative message, a ratio of 6-to-1. In order to have healthy, life-giving relationships. The Harvard Business Review, in collaboration with John Gottman, who runs his Love Lab out of the University of Washington, where he studies married couples, and he analyzes their communication, their nonverbals. He studies these couples in this Love Lab as they're able to stay at this this beautiful place for a few days. They analyze them, they study them. They've done thousands and thousands of couples. They can predict within I think it's like 98.9% who's going to stay married or get divorced in the next 3 years. It's unbelievable what they've been able to discover through their studies and analyzing these relationships. And one of the things that they've found is that ratio of encouraging messages to critical messages need to be about 6-1 in the encouraging side, right? Because we are so prone to clinging on to and focusing in on the negative messages that unless we get a ratio of about 6-1, positive to negative, encouraging to discouraging, or encouraging to critical, then we won't have a healthy relationship. And so they've actually studied this. They've put out the numbers, and they've realized that's how important encouragement is in the context of our relationships, and how much more important do we need to be taking care of those around us by constantly sharing with them encouraging messages. It's when you receive encouragement, there's this recognition, hey, somebody cares. God cares. The writer of Hebrews says, but encourage one another daily as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. I think when it comes to this idea of this ratio of encouragement to discouragement, of positive affirmation as opposed to criticalness, this is the importance of this. That we'd regularly be encouraging to those around us, that we would constantly be giving them these messages to kind of ward off the negative things that they are receiving each and every day. A good rule to live by, in something that I certainly strive to do in my life and acknowledge that I don't do it enough, is if you think something good, then say it. Let somebody know. If a thought comes into your mind, a positive thing, something encouraging, or some good thing that somebody has done, or a thank you, or expression of gratitude, or whatever it might be, say it. Text it, email it, write a letter. I don't ever want to rob somebody of an encouragement that pops into my mind, because I believe that oftentimes when it does pop into my mind, it's a gift that God has given for somebody else. And I've got to send it in order for them to receive it. That's the power of encouragement. I've been doing a exercise program called P90X since the beginning of January, and I'm doing it with 3 other guys. And we have this text thread that is open, and we're constantly sending out messages of encouragement. And I've never stuck with an athletic, endeavor this long. I mean, we're heading into the half of February now, so a month and a half so far, and it's a gauntlet. It's every single day you're doing something. Oftentimes working out for an hour and a half a day. It's a lot of work, and it's really hard. And I love doing something really hard with other people who are encouraging me to persist in it. And so this group of guys that I am in, we are constantly messaging each other, let's get it today, boys, or let's work hard, or man, that workout was a beast. You guys are amazing for finishing it, or whatever else it might be. And we've constantly been messaging each other, keeping each other accountable, but encouraging each other and firing each other up to be able to accomplish our fitness goals of doing this for 90 days, this really intense workout. That's the way I think God has designed community to work, that we would be this positive catalyst for encouragement in each other's lives. I love what it says in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24. It says, let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. Sometimes it needs to be premeditated. Sometimes we need to be intentional about bringing this encouragement into the lives of others. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. Continue to encourage one another. Don't give up meeting together, right? Because in the presence of people, you're oftentimes receiving encouragement from others. That's the power of that. That's how important these messages are. Now, here's a good way that we can look at things. If I need encouragement, right, it's this recognition that others need it as well, and so I'm going to give it. And if I think of something good, I'm going to share it. And it's amazing as we contribute to that positive cycle of encouragement, how much encouragement others will bring to us as they see us as a person who is lifting them up. They will be more prone to do the same for us. And so if I need encouragement, I want to be the person who first gives it out to start that process moving forward, to start that snowball rolling and having it take effect. And so I'm going to encourage others daily, first and foremost. The second thing that we can do to encourage others is encourage others spiritually. And we often think of encouragement, at least in the terms as I've been talking about it to this point, is non-spiritual, right? I mean, just kind of a general nice thing, saying a nice thing to somebody else. But all encouragement is spiritual. You know, whether you're saying, hey, good job on that project, or wow, you have a beautiful house, or hey, I really like what you did with your hair. You know, even that kind of encouragement might seem shallow, but that's spiritual encouragement, because encouragement is spiritual, right? It gets into our system. And so when we think of encouragement as the spiritual gift that we're extending to others around us, well, that's exactly the way that we ought to think about it. And so there's very practical ways to do something that is very intentionally spiritual. But I want you to listen to what Paul says in Romans chapter 1. He says, one of the things I always pray for is the opportunity, God willing, to come at last to see you. For I long to visit you so that I can bring you some spiritual gift that will help you grow strong in the Lord. And when we get together, I want to encourage you in your faith, but I also want to be encouraged by yours. I love how he talks about this relational dynamic of living alongside each other and allowing our faith to feed off of the faith of others and vice versa. You know, I want to be around people who encourage me in my marriage, right? Encourage me to work on my health and fitness, who encourage me to be a better father, to be a better husband, to be a man of God. I want to be around those kinds of people, right? Who I feed off of. They inspire me. The way that they are living their life inspires me. You know, I love the way that Pastor Garth begins our worship sets each and every morning with an encouragement for us. It's a call to worship, but it's a moment in which he is pleading with us to experience faith and expectation as we come before God in the presence of God. And he often is talking about a sunset that he saw, or an experience, an interaction that he had with another person that reminded him of God. All the ways that he sees God at work around him, and he's inviting us into that perspective. And it's such an important thing to be around people who see things that kind of way. I love my wife's passion for inviting people to church. I wish a little bit of that would rub off on me, and I think it has from time to time as I've joined her in really inviting others, extending invitations to others to come be a part of this community of Jesus that we have here in Seattle. I want to be around people who inspire me in the things of God, who inspire me to spiritual encouragement. And in turn, I want to be the kind of person that is inspiring others in that way as well, because we can inspire each other and encourage each other spiritually. Now, there's a practical way to implement this, to take something that maybe appears normal, maybe appears casual on the surface, and infuse it with spiritual meaning when appropriate. For instance, my kids are all playing sports, and there was a tough game last night that my daughter's team won by 4 points, and it was a playoff game. It was really important, had a lot of implications for their chances to make it to state. And my daughter played really well. She was really tough. She made a couple of three-pointers at really critical moments. And it's one thing to say, "Oh wow, great game," or "great shot," or whatever. But I always like to tell her about, hey, when you made that shot under pressure, that was great leadership, right? You were leading your team to victory in that moment. And I want her to kind of see things from that perspective. And so I constantly talk to her about how she's a leader. It's not just, hey, well, your threes were really on today. No, it's like, hey, that really fueled your team towards the victory line because you were expressing leadership there. And so in so many ways in life, a person gets a promotion. And instead of saying, hey, congratulations on the promotion, you could say, hey, you know what? You were faithful in the small things, and God rewarded you to something bigger. Because oftentimes that's how you get a promotion, right? Being faithful to the work that is in front of you and to the tasks that you had to perform so that you could move on to bigger and better things, right? Getting promoted is oftentimes a spiritual blessing that comes into your life. And so make sure that you inform people on that. Encourage them in a way that brings out that spiritual element so we can encourage others spiritually. And lastly, I would say this: encourage yourself in the Lord. Encourage yourself in the Lord. There was a time that King David in the scriptures was massively distressed. It was before he had become king of Israel, and he was experiencing all this pressure from people all around him, and there were a lot of really negative situations exploding all around him. And there were people who were actually so fed up with him that they wanted to stone him. And so it was a very, very difficult season in his life. I take that back. This is after he had become king. But it says in 1 Samuel 30, verse 6, it says, "But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God." David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. What does that mean? What does that mean? Here's an idea of what I think David was doing in that moment. I think he was preaching to himself, as often we find him doing throughout the Psalms. I think he was saying, hey, I have the faith to see this through. My God is with me. He never rejected me. He's never forsaken me in the past. He is with me. He is for me now in this moment. God has given me everything I need to accomplish what is in front of me, the task that is in front of me. I'm set apart for this work. God has set me apart for this. God has prepared me for this. I believe that David was encouraging himself in the Lord by preaching to himself these promises, these things that he had known about who God is, the reality of how God saw him in his life. And I believe that David was able to lift himself up out of that negativity, out of that very difficult, pressure-packed situation, and feed his spirit and fuel his spirit for the task that lay before him. When I was on my sabbatical, I was reading my journal from years past, especially when I had first received my calling as a pastor, because I wanted to fuel myself for the years that I had ahead by going back and looking at how God encouraged me to get into this in the first place. And so I was looking at these posts that I made in my journal 14 years ago, and I was so encouraged by the faith of my younger self. And I love the fact that I had written these things down, so many words about, hey, God is going to work this out. God is going to make a way. God is going to make it clear. And I had encouragement on file. So I was able to look back and I was able to see all the ways that God had actually made good on the things that he had said that he would do, on the ways that he worked in my relationship with my wife and my kids and the development that I was going through at that particular point in time as a pastor. And so I guess one thing I would say as a result of this is, save those messages of encouragement. You receive a phone call from a friend, save that voicemail. You receive a letter of encouragement from a parent or a coach or a teacher or somebody who loves and admires you, save that letter for future encouragement. Save that text. Remember that moment, lock it in, because oftentimes those moments of encouragement will continue to be sources of encouragement that we come back to years down the road when we see, hey, you know what? I was going through a really dark time and that person lifted me up out of that. And I made it through, didn't I? I made it through. And so I'm going to make it through again. I'm going to make it through whatever valley it is that I'm going through. And not only that, but I'm going to be the kind of person who helps other people make it through in the midst of their dark night of the soul. So I don't know where you're at this morning, but I'm trusting and believing that there is somebody who has logged in to be a part of this message that needs to hear this theme of encouragement this morning. You walked in to this message, you logged in, however you got in to this message this morning, heavy of heart. You're discouraged in your thinking. You're thinking, hey, I can't go on. I'm stuck. Maybe your kids are heading in the wrong direction, or your marriage is really struggling right now, or a situation at work is intense and stressful and stressing you out. Your health is deteriorating. Nothing seems to be working out in this moment. There's trouble on the outside, right? There's fear on the inside. You're facing all of these obstacles. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Let's embrace this truth that we serve a God who is an encouraging God. He's an encouraging God. And there's a prayer that I want you to pray. If you find yourself, if you relate with any of this, right? If you find yourself in that state of mind here in this moment, there's a prayer I want you to pray. And I want you to write it down. Write it down in your journal. Write it down in a piece of paper maybe you have lying around. But pray this prayer. Heavenly Father, I'm feeling discouraged this week. You are a God who encourages and lifts me up. Help me see how you are bringing encouragement into my life this week. And this is a prayer that, here's what I'm hoping for. This is a prayer that I'm hoping will give you eyes to see and ears to hear the moments that God intervenes into whatever difficult situation you are facing and brings encouragement and lifts you up. Because if you can see it as coming from God, it will strengthen you. It will bolster and embolden you and give you the confidence that you need to set yourself to the task that is at hand. And so I want to encourage you, pray this prayer this week. Pray it multiple times this week. And then record the ways that God shows you how he's bringing encouragement into your life. And here's the last thing that I'll leave you with. God wants you to be an encouragement to those around you. He wants you in turn to take the encouragement that you receive from him and to be an encourager, because God is calling you to be an encourager in this world. He's called you to live your life the way that Jesus lived his, and to reflect who Jesus is, reflect who this God is that we serve. We need to be encouragers. We need to be encouragers. And so set yourself a goal this week of being the person who is going to initiate that text, that phone call, or in that conversation, insert some spiritual form of encouragement. Remember, all encouragement is spiritual, but find ways to be intentional about encouraging others and lifting others up out of whatever it is they are dealing with. And if we can help aid and embed that ratio of 6-to-1, it'll prove to be incredibly healthy for our relationships, and it'll prove to, I think, bring improvement in many people's lives, as sometimes all people need is just a little encouragement to be able to help them out of whatever rut they might be experiencing. And so let's stay positive this week. Let's be encouragers. Amen. I'm going to pray for you. Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this theme this morning, a theme that I believe that so many of us needed this week. I know that I needed it. I always need it. God, we do live in a world that is a very negative place, and we have that negativity bias working against us. And so, God, in light of all of that, I pray that we would see the encouragement that you bring into our life. And God, that you would equip us to be those who are quick to give an encouraging word to those around us. God, to lift people out of whatever discouraging thing that they are facing, whatever negative things that they are facing, to bring that message of positivity, to bring that message of hope, bring that message that encourages them in the moment that they need it. And God, in turn, that we would be seen as encouragers to those around us, and that they would be more prone to bring encouragement into our lives, so we could see that feedback happen, that snowball effect of just building encouragement in our network of relationships. And so, God, I pray that you would initiate, God, bring encouragement through your Spirit into our hearts, into our lives this week. Send us out into our world as encouragers. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I want to thank you for joining us this morning. As always, I want to bring you to a place of giving this morning. We want to thank you for consistently giving generously to the work that God is doing through the church, and just remind you of that opportunity that you have once again this week. You can give in two ways. Online, you can give at westsidechurch.com/give through PayPal. Also, our church app You could search in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, Westside Church Seattle. Get our church app, and you can log in to connect your accounts to a way to give online through the app. So that's a great way to give as well. I want to thank you for all of your generosity to the church, all the things that we are able to do as a church community, providing encouragement oftentimes to people who really need it. We're able to do that because of your generosity. Your generosity is literally an encouragement to us, helping us know that God is behind the things that He has called us to do. And so thank you for being a part of that. Well, next week we're going to continue on in this sermon series, Stay Positive, and we have 3 more to go. We're going to be talking about gratitude, we're going to be talking about hope, and we're going to be talking about confidence. And so next week, I think we're going to take a look at the message of hope and talk about the importance of that theme in the midst of the world in which we live as well. So thanks for joining us this morning. Thanks for logging in. Hope to see you again next week as we continue this series. God bless everybody.